Welcome back to Middle East in Depth. As the Syrian war marks its third anniversary, let's see what the media is saying. Josie Ensel writes an article for The Telegraph marking the third anniversary of the outbreak of the Syria conflict, calling it the worst refugee crisis in recent history. The article says with an average of 6,000 people fleeing every day in 2013, Antonio Guterres, the UN's refugee chief, said refugee numbers had not risen at such a frightening rate since the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. The article adds Oxfam said only 12% of the money pledged under the UN appeal had been delivered. Furthermore, the article says the Syrian conflict shows little sign of abating and has killed 140,000 people to date, but Oxfam said it was vital to draw up contingency plans for the future. The article quotes Andy Baker, in charge of Oxfam's response to the conflict in Syria, who said plans for a long-term recovery need to be drawn up, as even if the conflict were to end tomorrow, Syrians would need assistance for years to come. We're now joined on the phone by Camilla Jelbart Mosse, Syria Campaign Manager for Oxfam. Welcome to the show, Camilla.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being with us. As I understand it, you're currently based on the Syrian border and you're working on the Syrian humanitarian issue. In this third year of the crisis, do you think we'll see a ramping up of efforts to ease the humanitarian situation?
So we're just approaching the third anniversary of the Syria crisis. So there's been 3 long years of suffering, and we've seen now over 9 million people in desperate need of humanitarian assistance inside Syria. There are 2.5 million Syrian refugees in neighbouring countries, including Jordan, where I am. So it's absolutely vital that we do start to see efforts really ramping up. And the UN Security Council, which has been blocked on Syria for so long, have passed recently a resolution on humanitarian access. So calling for all those in need of access inside the country to be able to reach aid and the assistance they need. So it's really important that we've seen this united front from the Security Council, but for that to actually turn into change on the ground, they will need to use their influence with all of the parties to the conflict to make sure that the people of Syria are put first and the suffering ends.
Yeah, and we've just actually looked at a Telegraph article that says that Oxfam has said that only 12% of the money pledged under the UN appeal has been delivered. Is this an ongoing problem, and what is seriously hampering the delivery of aid in Syria?
So the financial side, I mean, we've seen a lot of generosity from governments around the world, but this is the biggest humanitarian crisis of the century, and the UN launched a staggering $6.5 billion appeal, and this is to provide aid to people inside Syria, but also in neighbouring countries. So 12% is funded at the moment. It's absolutely vital that governments step up and pledge more money and make sure that translates into aid being delivered on the ground. Inside Syria, the hampers are also that while there might be funding for some of that aid, it can't get through because of the fighting or because parties to the conflict are not allowing civilians to move around freely. So that's where the political pressure comes in too. We need to make sure that all those fighting on the ground stop, allow citizens to move around freely and to access the assistance they need.
And as we understand it, it's all parties that are preventing aid from reaching Syrians.
Yes, absolutely. So there are hundreds of thousands of people in besieged communities who are totally blocked off from any aid getting through. Millions of others in areas where they're very hard to reach and where they don't have basics like healthcare provision, clean water and sanitation, food to eat, the things that by rights we all should have just to continue to live our lives. And in the neighbouring countries, lots of NGOs and UN agencies are working hard with the governments of the neighbouring countries to provide for refugees, but they're living in very difficult conditions. It's been a very stormy week in the Levantine region, and we've seen some flooding here in Jordan. So as you can imagine, people who are living in Zaatari refugee camp or in informal tented settlements who are dealing with lots of water flooding their tents are having a very miserable time of it. So with the third anniversary, it's why it's so important that people around the world are standing with Syrians and campaigning to make sure that governments do everything they can to bring the crisis to an end.
Yeah, Richard Spencer of The Telegraph actually also said this is the worst humanitarian crisis of the century, and also that it was the best documented war of all time. Do you think that this is reflected in the public will to see a solution in Syria?
I mean, I think we've launched a campaign called With Syria, so people can put the hashtag With Syria online. You'll find lots and lots of material about the campaign that demonstrates that people around the world, we've seen thousands of people come out in the last couple of days to hold vigils in solidarity with people in Syria and to push their governments. And lots of activity online. The hashtag has been trending all over the world. So it definitely shows that Syria isn't being forgotten, that ordinary people around the world really do care. But seeing that translate into action from leaders is another matter, and it's why we have to continue pushing as hard as we can to make sure that governments play the role that they need to. And many governments, have pledged support for peace and the Geneva process, for example. But we have to see that in all areas of their work. So some governments are continuing to pour arms into the crisis, into the conflict, which just further fuels the fighting. So it's really important that they prioritize the people of Syria and their access to aid and a political solution.
And an optimistic estimate that I saw said that the conflict could be resolved within 10 years. From your knowledge of the situation on the ground, do you think that's a realistic time frame?
Well, Oxfam has just conducted a study with refugees in Jordan, where I am, about their hopes for the future, and a staggering 65% of the refugees that we surveyed said that they didn't think that they would be able to return to Syria. They feared that they would never see their country again. Of the third who really thought that they would return, 78% of them said they didn't know when it would be. And what that really highlights is that the refugees are living in a limbo. They're starting to give up hope that they will ever be able to go home. I think it's the million-dollar question. Nobody knows when this crisis will end. But the key point is that it is solvable if the parties to the conflict will come to the negotiating table, if governments around the world will use their influence with those parties. We have to see an end to the crisis.
Yeah. Thanks very much for joining us today, Camilla.
Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you. That was Camilla Jelbart Mosse of Oxfam. For more updates, please visit levant.tv. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.